Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Tottenham have won again. I probably couldn't tell you exactly how they managed it, unless you watched it for yourself. It was a bizarre match. First 20 minutes or so, Tottenham could have been 3 or 4-0 down. But in probably the next hour of the game, or at least they created so many chances, should have won by a landslide. Such a strange game. It kind of had a bit of everything. It had a lot of the good and bad, the Mourinho era so far. Defence looked really shaky at times, but there's reasons for that, which we'll come to. But going forward, I'd say it's probably the best they've actually looked going forward. I know obviously people will say it was against Aston Villa, a team that are struggling. I think they're 17th in the Premier League, aren't they, right now? But in terms of chances, they created a bucket load. Let's look at the stats. 5 wins, 2 draws, last 7 games for Spurs. It hasn't been pretty, but it's been effective. Tottenham are, I think the word I'd use is probably relentless right now. They're just on a bit of a march. And there's goals aplenty. This was the 4-3-2 result of victory of Mourinho's 20 games so far. Only Liverpool have taken more points in that time since Mourinho was appointed in the Premier League. And this was the 3rd straight Premier League win. The first, I think it's in more than a year, Tottenham have had, which is amazing when you think about how good obviously they were in the past under Pochettino. So haven't strung together 3 Premier League wins in a row for more than a year. And obviously in a division that's so tight right now, 3 wins just absolutely propels you up that table. And Tottenham find themselves just a single point now behind the top 4, going into the big game, Chelsea against Manchester United, which obviously is going to have a big kind of indication of what happens next for the big match at the weekend. But all of that to come. All of that to come. I mean, let's focus on the madness of yesterday. It's actually my first visit to Villa Park. Somehow I've never been there before. Very cool old stadium, very much old school traditional place. Little element, kind of little feeling of White Hart Lane in points. Very old stadium, but it just had a really grand feel. Proper football amphitheatre is probably the best way to describe it. It started in chaos. Tottenham Hotspur do early goals conceded. That seems to be a bit of a knack. And this time it was Mr. Cool, Mr. Composed, Toby Alderweireld. Because he's had a week which, to be fair to him, has been a rather turbulent one, in a good way. He became a dad for the 2nd time in the early hours of Friday morning. Little boy, I believe it was. So he was obviously dealing with that. Only joined up with the squad quite late on. And I think it showed. He's normally so unflappable. But this time he was a bit all over the place. He admitted himself afterwards that it really wasn't one of his best performances. The goal itself, he conceded, or he scored. It was partly his fault. I felt the initial instance, he kind of really badly misjudged the cross itself, got himself into all kinds of problems. Also blamed to be laid at Hugo Lloris's door. I felt he had one of those games actually for a lot of it, maybe until the second half. He was quite static on his goal line. Glue in his boots kind of thing, and he wasn't really coming for much, and the two of them just stared at each other, and Alderweireld took the initiative and scored. But to be fair to him, went up the other end of the pitch and scored a very rare goal for him. Doesn't crop up with many, but there was a big element of luck to the original kind of like build up to it. A ball bounced off Dyer, fell into his path, but the finish was lovely for a centre back. Really cracking rocket of a shot into the roof of the net. So Tottenham were all square, which really wasn't expected because, Villa had a few chances. I think if they had a goal scorer in their ranks, they probably would be far higher up that table. And that's mostly because of Jack Grealish. He is superb. Last time I actually saw him live, obviously saw him live at the start of the season in the home game. I'm just trying to think. Last time before that was probably the playoff final, the first one, the one they lost against Fulham. I was covering the game for us there that day, and he's making a bit of a mockery of the fact that Spurs, just didn't go all in for him early that summer. Was it 18 months ago? They kind of dithered. They didn't go in with the kind of full price tag that Villa originally wanted. then we all know what happened next. Villa got their new investors, and that was that. It was all done. And he was staying. Even the player thought he was going. And I just look at him and I just can see what he would have done for Tottenham over the last 18 months. You know, Spurs would have had that Ericsson kind of replacement earlier, or competitor. He would have created so many chances for others. Very, very good player. Really old school as well. The way he has his socks rolled down his shin pads as well. It's really good to watch him play. And he gave Sergio Aurier so many issues, especially first half. Aurier just clattered him. If you kind of watch the footage, if you haven't seen it already, there's so many occasions where he seems to clatter into the back of him and gives him like a clip round the back of the head as well, just for good measure. He really, really struggled with him. And I think that's probably more so than a failing on Aurier's part, although he did do his usual failing to track back, which people know wind me up immensely. Apart from once, which was a brilliant clearance he did. I felt this probably wasn't so much something a stick to beat Aurier with. I think it was more the fact that Grealish is just such a good player. He finds these pockets of space. He's very clever in his use of the ball and when to dribble with it. Very, very good player. Certain similarities to a certain Argentine in the Tottenham squad now. Again, another player we'll come back to later in this. But yeah, defence was shaky. We're at 1-1 at this point. Ben Davies back in the team. Had a little bit of a mixed start to the game. Got turned very easily by, I think it was El Ghazi, wasn't it, for the cross, the one that caused the problem in the first place. But I actually felt with Ben Davies, I felt he really grew into the game. It's got to be rusty. He's been out for 2.5 months with this ankle problem, maybe more than that. I think it was Mourinho's first game, wasn't it? West Ham. So he's very much going to be a player that's rusty. But I just felt as the game wore on, he looked better and better. It was a great overlap. He set up a chance for Dele Alli because he's got that in his locker, but he's also able to tuck in as that third centre-back in possession as well. You can kind of see why Mourinho had planned everything around him in that defence. So it'd be interesting. I'd be stunned if he's able to play against Leipzig so quickly after this one, but I would imagine he'll be back in for Chelsea. He played well. I do think I saw him getting quite a bit of flack early on, but I just think you've got to give him a little bit of leeway because he was a player coming back into the team, straight back in as well. No on the bench, no minutes here and there. Came in, I think he played the full 90 minutes, didn't he? I'm just trying to remember. I don't think he came off for anyone. So that's an important 90 minutes in his legs. And I think he gets a harsh rap from people, Ben Davies, sometimes. I think because he's solid and dependable and not spectacular, I think people kind of expect so much more. And I think that's harsh. I think, we've seen Japhet Tanganga go in there, and I don't think he's been spectacular. I think he's come in and done exactly that, a very solid job, and he's getting lots of praise for it. So it kind of has to work both ways. Davinson Sanchez, I thought had a really good game. Another one who gets a little bit of flack sometimes, but I feel, other than a couple of sloppy moments in possession, I felt this was a game where he did well. My thing with Davinson Sanchez is often I feel he plays really well in the massive games against the likes of, the Liverpools, the Cities, European games. I remember him bossing Cristiano Ronaldo at points against Real Madrid. And then when he comes up against maybe awkward customers in terms of big burly strikers at teams lower down the table, he struggles. Sometimes overestimates his own strength and things like that. That shoulder barge he does, which always doesn't always come off. But I felt he did really well in a horrible, wet and windy day in Birmingham. I thought he did really well, Sanchez. So it's really interesting. Whenever I do my player ratings after a game, I must admit, and I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but I kind of don't bother looking at the replies. And the reason for that is everyone has a different opinion. They're so subjective, player ratings. That's the point. I absolutely have no thoughts in my head that when I do my player ratings, everyone's going to go, they are great player ratings. I completely agree. Because you're not meant to. Everyone sees a match differently. Everyone sees players differently. Everyone has certain players that they're very quick to see their faults. Others who very quick to see players' good points rather than their faults. So it always amuses me when I do occasionally look at the replies underneath the ratings. It's like I'll have someone going, "Oh my God, I can't believe you gave Aurier that score. He was rubbish." And then I'll have another one underneath who'll say, "You've totally undermarked Aurier. He was so much better than that." And for me, that's it in a nutshell. That's why I don't take it seriously. Some people get very, very angry about it. But for me, it's literally a number next to a name. It really is. So apologies if you've ever written a reply to one of my player ratings and you haven't got a reply back, and that's purely because it's kind of a blanket thing. I don't really do it because I'm not going to convince you that your opinion's wrong, because it's exactly that, an opinion, and you're not going to convince me probably otherwise either. But enough of that. I'm kind of waffling off on a different point there. It was just something that crossed my mind because I saw someone a couple of hours ago kind of launching, this is what my ratings are. You're completely wrong. It's like, your ratings are great. I think your ratings are terrific. They're your opinion. I don't share that opinion, but fair play for rating them. So anyway, back to the game. Attack-wise, we've talked about defence, let's talk about attack. Spurs were so creative. It felt like a game where Spurs were struggling, and then suddenly everything started clicking. The movement of that front four, Bergwijn, Ali, Son, Lucas, 23 chances created. That's more in an away Premier League game than Spurs have created in, I think it's more in the last 3 seasons. Kind of let that sink in. This is a team that has been struggling to create chances, I feel. And absolutely in this game, it does make you wonder if Harry Kane was there, or they'd bought a striker in the window, or even, whisper it quietly, they'd given Troy Parrott a couple of minutes. You do wonder what a striker would have done with some of those chances. 23 shots at goal. Incredible. And they just kept wasting them. Dele Alli, some brilliant movement. He's gotten a lot of flack for... He was very wasteful. He missed a lot of chances. But I think sometimes people then forget the actual movement that got him there was superb. Villa could not handle his runs. He was so good in that role. But just needs to put the ball in the net. Lucas, a little bit similar. Some wasteful moments, some good moments. Steven Bergwijn, I thought, so impressive again. He was wasteful as well. I'm not going to let him off the hook for that. But for me, that's 2 performances now, and I've been incredibly heartened to see just how well adapted he is to the Premier League. I wrote a piece earlier about how I think that's really needs to be a nod towards the scouts for Spurs, because they've been scouting really heavily for 2 years, and I know it's very easy for people to say, oh, but everyone knew about Steven Bergwijn, blah, blah, blah. But what the other side of scouting is, it's not just identifying a player, it's compiling meticulous research to kind of back a point that you feel he's ready to play in the Premier League. And that can be aspects of his physique, his running style, his fitness, his the way he deals with certain climates even, as tiny little things like that. And I think with Bergwijn, they absolutely nailed it. He's come in and quite literally hit the ground running. He, against City, worked incredibly hard, scored a beautiful goal. Against Villa, they really, really struggled to deal with him. There were so many occasions where he was running through. First one, obviously, we know led to the penalty. VAR checked it, and it's funny, I turned to someone in the press box and I said, as soon as they started to look at whether it was an offside, I was like, they've decided it's a penalty. They were moving from one... Once they decide it's a penalty, then you have to see if there's any offside in the build-up. And it was a penalty. I've seen people get a bit funny about it. I know Dean Jones, the Villa manager, was a bit upset about it, but ultimately, it kind of was, wasn't it? I mean, it's probably not something you'd say is the most stonewall, blatant penalty, but when you really boil down and look at it closely, yeah, it is. It was. So obviously, Bergwijn involved in that. He had another moment early in the second half when he raced away, and probably maybe just needed to be a bit more. I think the best strikers, I know he's not a striker, but the best strikers of the ball, they take early shots. Always remember Jermaine Defoe just always catch the keeper out by taking an early shot. And I feel there's a few times these Spurs attacking midfielders should do that. Lucas did it in the previous game, wasn't it? Had the shot from just outside the box, and you kind of feel that that's what needs to happen. It's moments like that where if you just hit it quickly. I think Bergwijn maybe could have done that in that first. We left it, and then he ended up getting tackled, but hugely promising. He's quite strange, his pace. At times I kind of felt he doesn't have the searing pace that certain people in the Netherlands were telling me he did have. And there's other moments where he really does motor away from people. It's almost like I think he's got quick acceleration rather than an overall kind of, sometimes you'll get someone that can sprint the length of the pitch and he absolutely outstrips everyone. Whereas I think he's got that initial burst of speed. He can just take himself away from a challenge. And I thought Thought he was excellent. I think he was really, really good, and I hope he's got the fitness to play in all 3 of these games this week, because I think Spurs are going to need him. He brings an added creativity. He mixes it up. He's a real kind of surprise element that the other players in Spurs don't have. And then we've got Son Heung-min. The strangest, most difficult guy to write about right now, because he's absolutely doing the job asked of him. He is smashing it. He's gone back to being the Son we all know and Spurs need when Harry Kane's out. He's scoring goals, 6 goals in 5 games. He's scored in every single one of those 5 games. He's doing that job. He's clinical in those moments when you've needed him. The run at the end of the game, yes, it was a terrible mistake from Engels, really, gifted the win in the end to Spurs. But Son, having looked incredibly kind of that lack of confidence before that, it didn't even look like he was going to miss it. He looked so cool, calm and composed, which makes the other side of talking and writing about Son so weird, because it's not top level Son. It's just not. He's scoring the goals, but the rest of his play, his touch sometimes lets him down. He's dribbling into people. He's just got a lack of overall confidence, which is weird, bearing in mind the goals he's scoring. Some of them really clinical ones. I mean, the goal against Middlesbrough that sent it to a replay, that was a clinical one as well. Even his penalty was a bit lacklustre, and fortunately it bounced back his way to poke in. But it's so weird what's happening to him right now. He was playing slightly more central at times yesterday rather than out wide. I think it just needs to click for him. I asked Mourinho after the game, I said, why do you think, because even Son said he felt, he hadn't done that well in the game. And I asked Mourinho, why do you think he's scoring the goals, but he's actually not, with his performances, hitting the level that we know Son can? And his explanation is, I think it's tiredness. He says, we're relying on Son and Lucas to play pretty much 90 minutes in every match. And he says, I think that's having an effect. I suppose you could argue that they've just had 10 days off. Son himself has missed 5 games this season through suspension. But I do wonder whether it's a cumulative thing of, he's just played so many matches for club and country over the last 2 to 3 years that he's a bit knackered, maybe mentally as well as physically. I think we've said a similar thing about Harry Kane as well over the years. And I do wonder whether that's kind of what's happening with him right now. Hopefully it's not, because I think that's something that isn't going to be fixed, because there's no real breaks coming up. I'm hoping it's more just of a rhythm thing. And, the confidence of that goal late on maybe will start to seep into his play. And he's quite, he's always been a big star for Spurs on European nights. So hopefully he brings that into this Wednesday night's game. But the other thing with Son as well, I do wonder whether that's going to influence him. He looked like he picked up a bit of an arm injury half-time, and he did some work on it, and he went in, and sometimes he didn't look as free-flowing and movement-wise in the second half. So maybe one to keep an eye on in terms of Son and that little kind of injury, because he'd be a big miss to Spurs. Even not in full form, he's getting those goals. Let's talk about midfield. I think we all know the moment the game really changed and Spurs got a grip was when a certain Giovanni Lo Celso has come on. I'm not going to wax lyrical about him because, quite frankly, my thoughts on Lo Celso. Absolutely top-class signing. Like Bergwijn, really good bit of scouting. A player who very much is adapted to the Premier League pretty quickly when you look at actually the starts he's made compared to, his slow, gradual introduction, which perhaps was purely about fitness, really. I think he was really, really good again. Spurs, everything good went through him. I feel that the Dyer-Winks partnership, it just doesn't work for me. I think you have to have a Lo Celso on Dembele in there. You have to have a forward-thinking, striding forward, direct player in that midfield. Winks does what he does very well. I actually feel he's developing quite well into that holding player. So I think putting him next to Dyer left him a little bit lost. He's not a creative force. He's not going to get into the final third. It's not his kind of game. We never expected that from Dembele, and I don't think Winks can really bring that either. Dyer started very rustily. I still think he gets turned too easily. He's got a bit of a turning circle as Titanic, hasn't he? And I just feel he got a bit better. I want to give him that. I felt just as he was starting to get into the rhythm of the game, he was taken off about the hour mark for Lo Celso because Spurs needed to push on. They couldn't just deal with the 1 point. I think it's Dyer or Winks with another, or at the maybe in a 3. I don't feel as a pairing you see the best of Spurs or either of those players really. So Lo Celso and Ndombele, get them in there, preferably in the future both really, with one of those, Winks or Dyer, behind them, because I think you think of Ndombele, Lo Celso, Bergwijn, Son, Ali when he's fully on form. Oh my goodness, there are so many exciting options in that team now. They're absolutely, it's exciting. Let's put it that way. Let's look ahead. Very aware I've waffled over a long time about a game that was a bit of a crazy one. A little mention on Engels as well. I think Alderweireld's getting a little bit of, I asked Mourinho about Alderweireld after the game and just said, what a crazy game he'd had. And he said, yeah, it's just kind of summing up of his week, really. Crazy goal at one end, great goal at the other. He said, but all he'll be thinking this week is about being a dad. And that's the main thing for him, I think he called it his 2 greatest goals in life or something are his son and daughter, which was a nice little kind of aside. But yeah, Engels had an even more strange day, didn't he? He obviously scored the equaliser, but he gave away the penalty and then a horrific mistake at the end, which is absolute. I did feel for Villa because, they're a team that play in a good way. They're not a team that just sit back and try and defend. They're trying to play the right way in the Premier League and absolutely got done by the silliest of mistakes. Just purely concentration lapse. So yeah, I did feel a little bit for Engels. But yeah, sorry, looking forward. Leipzig. Interesting, I didn't realise until I read something today, they're really struggling for centre-backs. I think they've got 2 injuries at the back, another player suspended as well. So they're really going to have to kind of do a bit of mix and match in the centre of their defence with players who aren't natural centre-backs. At any other time for Spurs, that probably would be the greatest thing in the world. But Spurs obviously not having a striker, it's slightly different. However, if Spurs can come into it and create the kind of chances they did against Villa, you'd hope that they put some of them away. Leipzig are a terrific team, though. They've got so much strength in other areas, midfield, going forward. Timo Werner's a terrific player. We know that. So they're never going to be any kind of pushover at all. They are flying high in the Bundesliga. It's going to be, obviously, other than Bayern, it's going to be Spurs' toughest test so far, obviously. And they're going to have to be fully at it. But we know this is Mourinho's competition. He loves it. And then we've got Chelsea. Chelsea straight away, just 2 days, just over 48 hours later, Spurs have got to get themselves back up for an enormous match at Stamford Bridge. But what I would say is if I was Frank Lampard, I was Chelsea, I would be more than just looking over my shoulder. I'd be slightly worried about the looming spectre of Mourinho because, to have gone again from 11 points when he joined to this single point right now. Obviously, we've got the match between United and Chelsea that's just about to happen after I finish this video. But they're just, as I said earlier in the video, the word relentless. Spurs just keep on going. I've said it in previous videos, kind of getting rid of players who wanted out of the club. It feels like a really tight-knit group again. They're fighting for each other. The spirit is there. They are scoring these late goals like they used to in the prime Pochettino era. They might not be playing the best football in the world. They might not be the tightest at the back. But there's never say die spirit has come back again. And it's just when they need it the most. And I feel that Chelsea, not only are they kind of toiling and struggling in certain games, but they've got a tough run of fixtures coming up. They've got cup games, haven't they? They've got Bayern, obviously. They've got Liverpool as well in the cup. They've got Man City coming up. Even their away games are against teams that are really battling it out. So I'm pretty sure it's the likes of Villa, West Ham, and there's another tough one that's completely gone out of my head. They're not easy games they've got coming up. Spurs haven't either, but I wouldn't want to be feeling entirely confident, if I was Frank Lampard right now. I think they've got a real battle on their hands. Obviously, we now have the element of possibly 5th place gets you Champions League after the Man City events of this week with UEFA. Personally, I still feel they're probably going to get that overturned. I wouldn't be stunned. Whether there's confidence in UEFA entirely seeing things out like this, and whether it's going to obviously go to the court of arbitration, isn't it, in sport? I'd be stunned if it's not. I mean, maybe just a year comes off it, and it does still go to that 5th place. But I don't think Spurs are going to be looking to try and finish 5th. It's just not the Mourinho way, is it? They're going to look to finish in that top 4, and got 2 absolutely cracking matches coming this week. I'll be at the training ground tomorrow we'll have the Mourinho press conference, and they'll put a player up as well. And then after that's open training, so I'll be able to tell you if there's any kind of little niggling injuries that are maybe going to keep people out. Whether Lamella's back, he was expected to be back for this game, Mourinho felt. Yeah, really looking forward to it. Big European night under the lights at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And then just 2 days later, Stamford Bridge for an enormous kind of, not quite winner takes all, but it's very much going to be a key indicator on where that top 4 chase is going to go and who's going to be leading the way going into the final months. So I hope you all enjoy it as well. Hopefully for the next video, we've got some really great results and performances to talk about. I think we'd probably just take great results, wouldn't we, if we had to. I shall catch you later.